Svaki čovjek voli, ništa drugo ne postoji. Kad voli manje boli i sve je lakše. Kad boli to što voli onda lomi čaše. Znam te i znaš me, svako je lomio, izgubio i dobio i suze prolio, patio. Moraš probat da bi shvatio, nemaš kupit tu školu, pare nisu toliko bitne ako si me pratio. Svaki čovjek jedan film, pogledao sam svoj pola drama, sad bi chill. Glavni lik je patio dosta, kako ne bi scenarije Balkan bez nade i posla. Sad bi malo humora i smijeha za jebanci u boji. Dosadna je ova crno-bijela tehnika, zovi producenta, fali šminka i perika. Ideja je super, a budžet tanak, jebi ga.
Svaki čovjek je hotel, svaki put kada odeš, tuga natoči koktel na duplo dno. Svaki čovjek je bordel, mutne vrate te vode, amor me strijelo probode. Idemo ponovo, idemo ponovo, idemo ponovo.
Perspektiva je u Bosni i Hercegovini, u Srebrenici. Ovoga puta su sa nama mladi iz cijelog svijeta, učesnici i učesnice Letnje škole Srebrenica, koju organizuje Centar za postkonfliktna istraživanja u saradnji sa Memorijalnim centrom Srebrenica. Mladi su govorili o različitim temama koje definišu ukupnu budućnost njihovih generacija, te o sličnostima i razlikama između sebe. I idemo odmah da čujemo šta su bili njihovi stavovi koje su izneli za našu emisiju.
Svaki čovjek jedan film, pogledao sam svoj pola drama, sad bi chill. Glavni lik je patio dosta, kako ne bi scenarije Balkan bez nade i posla.
Ja nisam imala nikad priliku djedu svog da upoznam, svoje amiđe da upoznam, mnogo svoje rodbine. U genocidu sam izgubila 22 člana familije.
As Amina said a lot of things, and I can definitely connect to that because I can't even count how many of my family members were killed in the genocide. And I usually do not speak about these things, but my father was actually wounded. The bullet went through the body of his dead best friend and then through his leg. I have a cousin whose mother was in the womb when her father was killed, so he doesn't even know she exists. I also have an aunt who's, she lost her husband and she was left with a 2-year-old kid to take care of. And there's so many more stories like that in my family, and all people from Srebrenica could tell you the same thing. I could sit here and tell you stories like about the people that were killed, like literally forever. But the thing is, we really have to focus as well on what's happening today. Yes, we need to remember the past and reflect the past, but as well we need to focus on what's happening today, because we cannot have a better tomorrow if we don't have a good today.
S čim se mi susrećemo, na primjer u školi, gdje u našim udžbenicima iz historije se negira genocid, gdje mi u osnovnoj školi kad smo bili, lekcija o genocidu, negira se genocid, onda to se ne spominje, taj čas uopšte se ne predaje, taj čas ne radi se ništa.
In school it's really hard, as Amina said. I actually was, when we had lessons, when we should have had lessons about genocide, I asked the teacher why he wasn't speaking about it. And whenever I asked a question, he would tell me, why are you fighting me? Why are you asking questions all the time? And I was actually sent to the administration office because of that. And so many things like that happened in middle school, so I was just a child. And as well in high school, there's...
Ja imam, mislim iz razreda sam imala neke ljude koji nisu moje vjere, s kojim se normalno družim. I onda samo vidim na društvenim mrežama kako one negiraju genocid, kako pričaju loše o nama.
So many more stories where people of other nationality are going to look at you in the eyes and they're going to smile and act as if they're your friends, and then tomorrow you're going to see something on their story where it's like they're supporting the war criminals. They are glorifying genocide. They are participating in the celebration of genocide. And it is scary you still have to wake up and go to school tomorrow with those people and speak normally to them as if you didn't see that, and you did. And when you tell them about it, they act like they don't know what you're talking about. They make you feel stupid. They make you feel like you're not like speaking right, you know? And it is really hard to live in Srebrenica, especially as somebody who has lost so many family members, somebody who has been living 19 years just listening about the genocide, about the killings, and somebody who has experienced things like that in school. Like, all you want when you're a teenager is to go to school and be at peace and not have like 16 people hate you just because you're other nationality. Even if you try to fix the relationship between you two, I feel like it always comes back to the same point, you know, because it is the thing that what we are taught in the household is what translates to how we act today. I don't want Srebrenica to become a place that is unlivable. I want people to live here. I want people to at least sit and talk.
Being aware of what happened, speaking about it, being also aware of your feelings and how they differ from other groups, because again, as was already mentioned, as an international, even though there is a heavy feeling in my heart, it has nothing to do with people who had to experience it. Does being aware of how this shapes your life as well, how you were privileged not to go through this, how you can go on with your life and not worry about, you know, anything that these people have to worry about. And then the most important thing I would say is advocacy. When all of us go back to our respective communities, respective university, workplaces, whatever, advocating for what happened here, speaking about facts and not emotionally charged narratives, not allowing what unfortunately we're still seeing to go on, just fighting with what we have to really make it never again, even though unfortunately we saw that it still repeats, but I believe that we as the youth can at least try to contribute to something, and even if you're able to persuade or make one person think twice before glorifying a war criminal or thinking that Srebrenica was made up, then I think it's worth it.
This is something I don't want to get used to, but sometimes I cannot run away from it. Sometimes I'm having a beer at a bar with a local friend, and they comment like, but during the siege we're doing this and this and that. And I'm like, I cannot get used to that.
Watching the clip as an international, I think the thing that resonated with me the most was when Luana was talking about how, like, she can never get used to how, like, prevalent and, like, omnipresent, like, the scars or, like, the wounds of the war is when you're just, like, living in Bosnia. And I've only lived here for, like, 3 months as well, but I also feel the same way.
I also have Nazi great-grandparents as a German, who hasn't. So dealing with the past is incredibly important. I also know how Germany dealt with the past and how it's often glorified, considering that denazification is like one of the biggest myths in Germany, that it happened right after the Second World War. How many people, how many perpetrators got off free, same as here. And how, when we say never again, apparently it just doesn't apply to all situations, because there were so many murders based on ethnicity, on religion, genocides since the Second World War, and we don't talk about them. I also didn't learn about the wars in the Balkans in school. German history ends with reunification. So when we say never again, apparently that doesn't mean that much.
Neki nisu još ni pronađeni, neki možda neće nikad ni biti pronađeni, možda su spaljeni. Neki nisu kompletni. Kod nekih je samo par kosti ukopano. I to je sve strašno. I onda oni to slave. I ti to kad sve vidiš, bude ti muka, dođe ti da plačeš, da vrištiš, da jednostavno ne znaš šta da uradiš.
I think it's even for me, even though I'm from Bosnia, I think it's impossible for me to understand how people from Srebrenica feel. I can have sympathy, I can feel sadness, but I think I can never even comprehend or imagine the pain and suffering that they're feeling on a day-to-day basis. And it's impossible to be, I think it's very idealistic to try to have justice in this, because if anything, they should be allowed to have 5 days of mourning during the commemoration period, and they shouldn't have the opportunity, they shouldn't see glorification of the crime. They shouldn't see glorification of some of the individuals who committed that crime, literally shoved in their face meters from the place they're living in. I think it's pointless to talk about what could have been done for the past 20 years to avoid the rehabilitation of certain individuals and certain criminals, because there could have been a lot better job done. And I think that the main fault lies in our country, who failed to act on its own principles to protect the victims, the ones who actually survived, to protect them from additional trauma, to protect them from additional emotional distress, to give them an opportunity to go back to their homes where they grew up and to feel as if they actually belong there. And I think it's very sad that most of people who actually came back to Srebrenica are quite open when they say that they don't feel comfortable living there anymore, even though that's the place where their families were living for generations and generations.
I sometimes speak to my Austrian friends, and they never had to think about certain topics, and they do not share the same family history, I guess. They don't have to go back to every summer to a city where a genocide happened, or they and have to think about that.
Melissa talked about that we have Austrian friends, and they don't have to deal with a genocide or with war, but we also have Austrian friends. They are born in Vienna, but their parents are from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Chechnya, and they don't have the opportunity to visit the homeland of their parents. They only living in Vienna, but we, the diaspora from Bosnia, we have the opportunity to come to Bosnia, to build a relationship with this country, and I think I'm happy about that I have this, that I can do this, that I can learn the language, that I can meet my people, and that I can come to Bosnia, but not because not everyone can go to the homeland of their parents.
I also grew up as a diaspora kid, and I really just agree with her, because that's what I also experienced. I just, a couple of years ago, I just realized that it isn't normal that I'm so obsessed with the war, or that my parents had to talk to me about it. And my Austrian friends really also just don't really understand that. They're just whatever, what do you mean? And it's really nice to have other people who share this same experience. And I also wanted to add to the reconciliation part, because yesterday I mentioned forgiveness, and what I meant by that is that it's up to everyone if they want to forgive. And I don't think that any victim should be forced to forgive, because it's their individual decision if they want to or do not want to. And especially here in Bosnia, what Azemina said, they face discrimination every day, genocide denial, and so on. So yeah, just as the first girl in the video said, reconciliation is a really abstract word, and we need to be careful if we're using it.
Perspektiva već 9 godina veruje u snagu dijaloga i pokušava da dijalog odgaja. U tih 9 godina kroz našu emisiju prodefilovalo je na stotine mladih ljudi. Neki od njih su prvi put čuli mišljenje drugačije od svog, a verujte, neki od njih čak su primetili da greše i predomislili se. Idemo zato sada da čujemo šta misle mladi iz različitih delova sveta nakon svog učenja o ratu i miru ovdje u Srebrenici.
For me personally, the main difference between the youth in Austria and the youth here is that you kind of know what your history is. You have this one narrative and you know what happened in the Second World War, for example. But here you have 3 or 4 different histories of how or what happened in the 90s, and or that you don't even study about what's happened in Srebrenica or even other parts of Bosnia like Prijedor, Visegrad and so on. So for me personally it's about the way how we talk about war and also how we can kind of learn about how to forgive each other and also how to move on maybe even.
I think the biggest difference like between the people living here, between us locals and the people that usually come, it doesn't matter if they're like just people who are from Bosnia or people who
just came here for the first time, like Westerners. I feel like the biggest difference it certainly is understanding, the way like we understand what happened here and the way they do. It's just very different. I feel like people do not even realize how big that gap is, the difference between the understanding of the people who actually lived
through that, went through that, or just listened about that. For example, my mother, my father, they've been telling me stories since I was a kid. And it's just very different when you actually like live through it.
And when you just listen about it, obviously. So I feel like the biggest difference is that, understanding. And I feel like people should be very careful when it comes to that, especially people who just come here for the first time. It's okay to ask questions, it's okay to want to know, but it's the way you understand it, you know? I feel like many people don't even care.
No, I don't even care. It's like kind of harsh way of saying they don't want to really understand what happened here. They just sort of come because they heard about it or they want to learn more, but they do not care to go further, to understand what happened here.
I'm from Bosnia, Velika Kladuša, where I studied, where I went to my high school. And after my high school, I went to Ljubljana to study. And I saw the difference in the school system, where in our high school, they did not teach us about genocide here that happened. We would hear about it, we would know about it, but it was not the part of our school system. On the other hand, when I went to study to Slovenia, we were actually learning about genocide, learning about facts that happened here. And I think that's a really bad part of the history that is not being taught in our schools in Bosnia, but in other parts of the world they are.
I think it's fair to say that, like, from one side it is important to say that people should get more educated, because we tend to focus on the situation, the narrative in Bosnia when people come here, when they learn about it and so on. And it's easy to say that we mind when somebody just comes here almost touristically, but we should also ask ourselves, how much do we as youth from Bosnia, I'm talking about the Bosnian group, how much do we as youth from Bosnia, how much we know about things which happened in Croatia, what happened in Kosovo, what happened in Serbia. We're forced to use alternative ways of education, we're forced to use different articles on the internet which are often very biased, we are forced to listen to teachings of different scholars which are also often very biased, and it's almost impossible to find a golden standard between objectiveness and a wide range of information and case studies of that specific event or that specific crime or that specific tragedy. So you have to improvise in order to actually educate yourself, or you have to be lucky to be surrounded by people who are willing to educate you and who will offer you at least a good amount of objectiveness in order that you have a healthy sense of what happened without any corrupted information or corrupted data, which is almost, if not impossible.
My parents are from Srebrenica, and I was born in Sarajevo, and we lived there in Sarajevo. So every year we would come about 2 times in Srebrenica, and it's always hard for my parents. We never stay the night. because our house here that they built is not in great conditions anymore, and they always just return home because they don't feel comfortable. They always feel sad, they are overwhelmed, so we just return home. So I'm here. This is the longest I've been in Srebrenica for a while. I'm struggling to find my place here because I've just never stayed here this long, and I don't know, it's hard seeing your parents not be able to stay here, and they've spent their whole lives here, and the only time they feel comfortable here is when they're surrounded by family that they love, and they laugh, they kind of go back into their youth, and now it's different, which is kind of ironic, only on the 11th July when all the family gathers around is when they kind of feel at home, which is sad.
I was thinking about the similarities or differences between the youth here versus the youth in Japan, and I would say the biggest difference is how politically engaged they are, or how much they care about the society and their community. In Japan, it's like a huge problem that like young people aren't even like going to elections. They're not even voting because they're just so apathetic about their own politics and like what happens in their own community. But here, everyone I met, basically, they've been like working in like the this field since they were like 15, and they're like advocates or youth workers, I think is the word. Yeah, youth workers. And yes, like they've been like, we're like the same age, and they have like 10 years of experience. So yeah, I would say the political engagement is the biggest difference.
So we'll start with a comparison between youth in Bulgaria and youth in France, specifically Paris, because that's where I'm doing my master's in international security at Sciences Po. So it was a very different educational system, and that's what I will start with. What I noticed from personal experience was, at least back home, in the capital of a Balkan country, our educational system did not allow for any engagement. It did not allow for any critical thinking. It was just reading dusty books by a professor that was written back in 1989 when the world looked very different, and you just have to reproduce that or you risk failing your exam. And it was very different in the Western university that I'm studying in now. So first of all, I noticed that people had a very wide common knowledge about the world. Of course, since I'm studying international security, Bosnia and Herzegovina is also talked about a lot as a country that struggled and is still struggling with post-conflict reconstruction. So this was the main difference, the knowledge. Because you have the opportunity to do that, because you have more economic stability usually, also considering the profile usually of students in these, so to say, elite universities. So this is what I will say. Something that I did notice, funnily enough, as a difference between two Balkan countries, between Bulgaria and Bosnia and Herzegovina, is that civil society is a lot more active here. And it definitely is because of issues when it comes to, getting things from the institutions. So people have to fight for their own rights. They had to do that since after the war. So it became this absolutely amazing, flourishing civil society space, which is amazing to witness as someone, who doesn't have that in their country. I do have family that's in Ukraine, so I usually try not to talk about it too much since it is a very open wound. They used to live in Kiev and now they moved to Western Ukraine. The situation, funnily enough, after the few days of the youth school that we saw and the panels that we had about genocide denial and involvement of international community, sadly enough you see some trends that happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina that are happening now. So of course, we're very grateful international community really stepped up for Ukraine, but there are definitely some gaps happening, so there's a lot of visibility. But maybe not as much work on the ground as local civil society would want. So just sending money abroad isn't conducive, so to say. So unfortunately, I would say that there are some lessons that were not learned, not only from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but from other countries that also experienced war and that are experiencing war right now. So unfortunately, this might end up being a hard pill to swallow in the end.
I am ethnically half Bosnian Serb, half Croatian, and I've experienced a lot of attacks and nationalist violence on both sides of my ethnicities. I think that in terms of peace, I absolutely agree with everyone was stating about the economic opportunities and empowerment, and also the disappearance of nationalist rhetoric and hate speech, genocide denial, everything that comes with that.
I think one of the main differences is kind of an apathy, because, I mean, there is a huge civil society here, but also I've seen so many people really active and like fighting for change give up and leave, because you kind of have to play the political game in order to just like get to positions where you have the feeling that you can make the change, and the self-realization of your life just very much depends on it. So I've seen a lot of people trying to make it better and then also realizing that they are fighting for this country, but when is the moment where they are starting to fight for themselves and for their life, for their future, for their potential family's future. So for me, that is one of the main differences. And the peace here, it often doesn't feel like it. It feels more frozen, well, especially currently with the current threats, with the constitutional crisis that is not really acknowledged in a form, and it's very hard to distinguish what is the normal political game with the rhetoric and the hate speech and making people panicky to keep this system running.
I time završavamo još jednu epizodu Perspektive. Onako kako često završavamo i inače. Podsjećanjem svih vlasti, svih političkih stranaka u svim zemljama regiona da se o budućnosti ne može govoriti bez mladih. O stabilnosti, o sigurnosti, o očuvanju mira ne ide bez onih koji taj mir sutra treba da čuvaju. Mladi su naš prioritet, pa ih gledamo i u narednoj epizodi Perspektive ovdje u Srebrenici za 7 dana. A vas pozivamo da do tada pogledate priče naših dopisnika i dopisnica na perspektiva.plus. Vidimo se sljedeće nedelje.
Svaki čovjek jedna knjiga, ja bi bio slikovnica da me nije briga. Život bi trebao biti igra, ali piše romane, zato uživaj dok pišeš i ne gledaj sa strane.
Svaki čovjek je hotel, svaki put kada odeš, tuga natoči koktel.